and I had to get off the bed because they had to fix it for me to get an epidural, and I couldn't stand during a contraction. Like, I was laying on Marco, like, he was holding me. He was like, I can't do this. He was like, it'll be over soon, like, you're gonna get an epidural. So he has to leave for the epidural, which I guess is standard procedure. It's like kind of scary to watch, I guess. The doctor comes in and the anesthesiologist is on his way. The doctor comes in and she tells the nurse, like, hey, you need to get the baby's heart rate on the monitor because it's been off for about 30 minutes and we need to make sure that it's stable before she goes through with this epidural. So the anesthesiologist shows up. I'm just alone with the nurse and she's trying to find the baby's heart rate, and I'm having contraction after contraction, literally sitting with her for like 30 minutes, so that's about 10 contractions, waiting for her to get the baby's heart rate on there so I can have this thing go in my spine. She's like holding my hand. I'm like grabbing her for dear life, like I'm in pain. What's going on? I'm not even going to be able to get an epidural because I'm having so many contractions. Like, you're never going to get it in. I can't stay still during an epidural. Like, these hurt so bad. So the guy, he's like cleaning off my back. He's kind of not paying attention to how the nurse said, like, they need to find the heart rate. He's just kind of doing whatever. And he's like, okay, well, I'm just gonna stick in these needles and numb you. And I was like, no, I'm having a contraction. He's like, it's okay if you move during this. And I'm like, okay. So he's like numbing me or whatever. And I'm like, okay, like, I was freaking out. I was like, oh my God, am I going to have a contraction while you're doing this? He's like, actually, I already put in the catheter. Like, your epidural's done. I just have to push the medicine. I was like, what? Like, I didn't even feel anything. Didn't know. It was just over. During this point, like getting this epidural, I never asked about the side effects. I have watched a million birth stories on YouTube, so I know like what they can be. I didn't ask him. He didn't even ask me really anything. All he asked was what my blood pressure was from the nurse, and then he asked me if I had any heart problems. So my blood pressure when I was admitted to the hospital at 6 p.m. was 114/61. Low blood pressure is anything below 100/60. I tell him that I have tachycardia and sinus arrhythmia. So he looks at me and he's like, wait, like, what? And I was like, yeah, like from pregnancy. He's like, are you on medication? I say no. And he says, you're probably fine. So I'm like, well, I can't do this without it, so we're just gonna roll the dice. So that was before he put it in. He put it in, that's what happened. When my blood pressure when I was getting it was 139/98. Like, it was high because I was in so much pain. I was freaking out. He administers the medicine. She lays me down. She says, okay, I'm gonna have to flip you every so often so it doesn't go to one side. And I don't really know what to expect with this. So I lay down and she's like, oh, I need to empty your bladder too. So she puts a straight catheter in because I can't get up to pee and empties my bladder. I start shaking like uncontrollably. Like, I'm just shaking violently. And I'm like, yo, is this normal? Like, what's going on? Like, I'm shaking. My voice was like all shaky. She's like, oh yeah, it's from the epidural. Like, you're having a side effect. And I was like, is a side effect like this severe? She was like, well, I don't know. Like, it's whatever. So she starts like packing on freaking blankets on top of me to get me to like have pressure on me so I stop shaking. Marco is still not in the room, and I got my epidural at 4:30. So he's been out of the room for about 30 to 40 minutes by now. I got my epidural, and he came back like 30 minutes later after my epidural, after she like emptied my bladder and everything. He comes back. My mom's there now, and they come in, and he's like, what happened? Are you okay? Like, they said it was going to take 20 minutes. I was gone for an hour. And I said, yeah. He's like, why are you shaking? And I said, I don't know. And I'm like, I just want to try to go to sleep. Like, whatever. And so Marco asked me like about the pain from the epidural, and I said, yeah, I can still feel the contractions in my hips. So from the epidural, I couldn't feel pain, but I felt my legs. I just couldn't move them. They were like tingly and cold, and I hated that feeling. But I still felt contractions in my hips at that point. The nurse like, okay, you can just rest, like lay, whatever. It was, like 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm trying to fall asleep, and I realized that I'm not doing good. Like, I'm just not doing good at all. Like, I feel really lightheaded. I feel like I'm struggling to breathe, and I don't know. It was like I was going to slip out of consciousness is what I felt like. And so I tell my mom, and Marco, I was like, yo, I don't feel good. And so then the blood pressure cuff goes off, because when you're in labor, like, you have to wear it. They take it like every hour or whatever, so often. It's taking my blood pressure. And I said, what's my blood pressure? And it was 90/52. So it went from 139/98 to 90/52 in an hour. And so they get the nurse comes in, and they're like, yeah, she has low blood pressure and she doesn't feel good. And I said, yeah, I feel like really weak and like dizzy and everything. So they gave me fluids, and then my blood pressure just kept dropping from there on out, like that I just kind of felt sick, and my blood pressure got down to 80/40. They said that they weren't going to like be able to do anything about it, that they tried the fluids and it was just like a side effect from the epidural, and it wasn't affecting the baby's heart rate, so that they weren't really worried about it at that time. After the epidural and the drop in the blood pressure and the shaking, I had severe itchiness. So my entire chest, everywhere that wasn't numb from the epidural, itched like crazy, and I wanted to scratch my skin off. I just couldn't even deal with it. They gave me like ice packs. They just shoved ice in latex gloves and they gave it to me. And I just put it like on my chest and everywhere. I had to like keep those on during the whole rest of the part of delivery because it itched so bad. By this time, it's like 7 a.m. and it was shift change for the nurses. And I got a new nurse. And when she came in, I told her, like, I could feel a lot of pressure in my butt and in my pelvic area, and it was beginning to hurt. And she said to just keep pushing, like, my epidural button, which releases, like, extra, I guess. And you can press it every 15 minutes. So I pressed it and it wasn't taking it away, and like she said, like the epidural doesn't take pressure away, and this was pressure, and I was like, yo, I feel like I have to poop. Like, it was a lot of pressure. And so she said, okay, I'll check your dilation. She checked me and I was 7 centimeters. And I was like, okay, like this is moving along. Like, I'm super happy because I'm exhausted. Like, it's almost been 24 hours of being awake and I only got 4 hours sleep the previous night. So I'm like, okay, like this is moving along. So the rest of the time I just tried to rest. The pressure got really bad again around 9:30 a.m. and I was like, okay, I think I need to push. Like, I'm really feeling like I need to push. She feels really low. There's tons of pressure. So the doctor came in and she checked me and I was 9.5 centimeters. So I dilated 2.5 centimeters in 2 hours, and that was around 9:45 that she told me that. And like labor had picked up so much. Like, I still had an epidural, so I don't feel like contractions, like the pain. Like, I feel a lot of pressure. I feel a lot of like uncomfortable kind of sensation in my hips, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm about to start pushing. So she said that she was going to start me on Pitocin. So I was just in labor after getting the side attack and the Foley balloon on my own, and like having my water broken. I wasn't on Pitocin. She said that she was going to start me on Pitocin for the last ½ centimeter because my cervix still had some to dilate. So she wanted the contractions to be stronger. So she started me on Pitocin. And I'm like, okay, we're about to do this. Like, I'm just continuing to rest. But the nurse had put me in a sit-up position and, like, my legs in, like, a circle. And I could start to feel that my legs and my feet were swollen. Like, severely swollen. Like, after I seen my feet, I was like, oh, these are balloons. And I was like, this is very uncomfortable. I just want to lay down. I want to try to go to sleep. She was like, no, like, you need to put pressure on your cervix to dilate it the rest of the way and efface the rest of the way. And she wanted to move the baby down with that position and the Pitocin because she was at -1 station still. So there's like -3, -2, -1, 0, and then 1, 2, and 3. So like 3, the head's out. And she was still at -1. And when I went into the hospital, I was at -3. Like, she was still up there. So started me on Pitocin, and I got super nauseous. And I was like, yeah, I think my sugar's low. And I kind of just want to eat a popsicle. I'm really thirsty. She was like, you can have a sip of water, like ice chips, but I wouldn't eat a popsicle. Again, if you're feeling nauseous. By this time, like, lots of hours have passed, and I've already consumed like 7 popsicles. So I'm like, okay. So I'm sitting up, I'm like half asleep, and I'm like, Marco, I don't feel good. Can you get me a bag? And he's like getting the bag. He brings it to me, and I just projectile vomit. Like, and he's not to me yet. He's like in front of me a little farther away, and I'm numb from like basically the ribs down. So I can't like sit myself up. All I can do is like move my head. And so I vomit and I can't get away from it. And so I'm like breathing it in because it just like projectile and then smashed in my face. Like, it was projectile to where I hit Marco with my vomit. Vomit went like all over the sheets, like on myself. So he brings me the thing. I continue to throw up into the bag. And my mom's like yelling, like, get her up, because I'm like breathing it in, like I can't get away from it. So they sit with me and I vomit every color popsicle that I ate. So that was interesting. And I felt so much better after I vomited. So the nurse comes in and I'm like, yeah, I just threw up. She's like, that means like it's pretty much time to push. Like, we should check you. I was like, what? She was like, yeah, when you start vomiting, like it's time to push. She was like, oh, I pushed 2 of my kids out vomiting. And I was like, okay, no one told me that was part of it. I get the doctor in, and then she checks me and she's like, yeah, you're 10 centimeters. Like, we're doing this. And I was like, okay. And by this time it's like 11:30. So she gets the room ready and something beeps. And I was like, what's that? She was like, oh, your epidural's out. And I'm like, no. Like, we cannot be pushing when my epidural isn't like working. So she was like, okay, we'll get the anesthesiologist to come in. He'll fill it up real quick and then we're going to push. And I was like, okay.
Well, we're 10 centimeters. We are waiting for our nurses and doctor to start pushing. Thankfully enough, the epidural just decided to run out right now, so we're also waiting for the anesthesiologist to come pop a new bag on there.
Like I'm gonna barf.
See if we can get you barfing on. That epidural thing is not happy that it's empty. Goodness.
Oh my gosh.
It's okay.
Okay, turn it on. So the anesthesiologist comes in, does it real quick. It's just like whatever he was doing. And she sets the room up and she just gets into like this mode, this nurse. Like, she was kind of I want to say like standoffish kind of, just like business, no pleasure before the pushing. But during pushing, like she was a freaking all-star. She was like my biggest freaking cheerleader, to be honest.
And push. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's do it one more time. One more time and push. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
We started pushing, and like I'm pushing from still -1 station. Like my baby's pretty far up there still. So she teaches me how to push. She says I'm doing a really good job. She can feel inside. I can feel her inside, like checking everything going on. The baby's monitor kind of went off for contractions. Like we couldn't find it anymore since she was so low. And the placenta's there, like it's the thickest part, kind of like above my pubic bone at that point. They put an internal contraction monitor, and then we could tell when I was having a contraction. And I was contracting every 2 to 3 minutes, and I would have to push for like 90 seconds at a time. So 3 to 4 pushes, and it was exhausting. And so I'm pushing. They tried different like positions with my legs. They had like little stirrups, and she had like handlebars for me to hold on to. She had me like hold on to my legs. She even like made a tug of war rope out of a sheet, and that was like the most intense pushing, and it worked, but it was exhausting. Like she would hold on to one end and I would hold on, and I would just push so freaking hard. And so about 2 hours pass that I've been pushing, and I'm like, is this happening? Like, when are you going to get the doctor? So she says, you know, we get the doctor when we can see the baby's head. So she just keeps saying, like, the baby's head is stuck under your pubic bone. The pubic bone's here, and the baby's head would just, like, rock under it and then just always go back. Like, it wouldn't push through. So she's telling me that, and I keep pushing, like, trying to get through. And the doctor comes in, he checks to see how I'm pushing. He says it's really going well, so everything's fine. So then, like, we can see the baby's head, like, we can see her hair. Everybody was, like, so ecstatic about her hair. Like, the nurse said, like, she has the longest hair that they ever seen a baby born with. And so we could see it. I could see it. I had a mirror most of the time, but not later during delivery because there was too many people. But so I could see that. So after about another half hour, the doctor comes in. He's like, yeah, you've been pushing for a while. I'm kind of surprised that the baby's heart rate is still stable. You know, if you're still having trouble, we're going to use a vacuum. And I was like, I do not want to use a vacuum. That was one of my fears in birthing class when they showed us that. So he like checks inside, and this is a big man, like he's got some hands. And he like shoves his whole hand in there, and he's like, oh, this is why she hasn't come out, is because she is still face up. So she's still posterior, so that's just not how the baby's head was shaped, like in the womb, to go through the canal that way. And so I'm like, okay, like what's going to happen? I'm going to have a C-section, what's going to happen? And they were like, no, like we'll might have to use the vacuum to get her out, and she might have bruising on her face. And I was like, oh my gosh, what the freaking heck? So he was like, he got like a big tub of mineral oil. And I'm like, what's going on? He starts massaging down there, and he says, I'm going to turn her. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, I'm going to reach in and turn her. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And I could feel all of this pressure. Like, I want to make that known. Like, I can feel what he's doing. It's very uncomfortable. When he's, like, massaging, he's going like this. Like, sorry to be graphic, but he's going like this at the end because he's like, I don't want you to tear. Da-da-da. And it all feels uncomfortable. So he is like, okay, when you push, I'm going to turn her head, and then I'm going to block it so she can't turn back. And I was like, okay. And he did. He turned her and she was face down. And when I would push, I would feel like movement, like things were moving now. And so he was like, okay, like that's all you need to do. Like just keep pushing. We're going to have the baby. And I said, okay. So I pushed for another hour. So I pushed for 3.5 hours. I labored for 16 and then I pushed for 3.5 hours. And finally, like, we seen her head and it crowned, and they were like, okay, like, on the next push, like, you're gonna have her, you're gonna feel a lot of pressure because her shoulders are gonna come out, and you're gonna have her. Meanwhile, I've been on oxygen for like 2 hours because I've been pushing every 3 minutes, and I'm just exhausted. While you're pushing, you have to hold your breath. Like, I felt like I was going to die. So he's like, yeah, on the next push, like, you're gonna have her, like, everybody's getting ready. Like, they got these masks on, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is it. So I pushed, and then they, like, picked her up, and I, like, started crying. I, like, laid back. I was, like, so exhausted, I started crying. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, congratulations. And they put her on my chest, and she was just so cute. I was holding her, but my bed was like angled down, so my butt was in the air to be able to do this. And I have really big boobs, really big. So they're like suffocating me. And they put her like on them, and like she's just so tilted back. And she's like in my neck, and I can't see her face, and I was just hearing her breathe, and I was like, she's kind of gurgly, like, what does that mean? So they took her and they suctioned her mouth out and her nose because like she did poop in her sack, so they just wanted to make sure like everything was okay. I don't know what's going on downstairs. I'm just like looking over here and watching her, like what they're doing and everything. And Marco was like, I'm going to go with her. And that was part of the plan. Like, he was never supposed to stay with me no matter what happened. Like, he was supposed to go with her. So he went with her, and like I can see them. So they're like checking everything. Her vitals were perfect. She was so healthy. She was 7 pounds 7 ounces. Like, her, I think like her feet were a little blue, but they said that was normal. And she scored a 9 on her little APGAR scale, which was really good. So they gave her back to me. I'm holding her. I'm like, I want to sit up. I don't feel like I can hold her very well. Like I said, she's like on my boobs. She's rooting like she wants to breastfeed, and I'm trying to figure that out. I can't see her like over my boob, to be honest. So I'm like, okay, I need to sit up so I can figure this out. They were like, you can't sit up. And I was like, why? And they were like, no, you just can't. Did you deliver the placenta? And they said, we can't deliver the placenta, like you're hemorrhaging. And I said, okay. And so they took the baby back to the thing, and I said, well, why are you taking her? And they were like, well, you're bleeding too bad. So I think they took her, like, they never explained it to me, like, I was asking questions, but there was a lot of people, like, running around. So I don't really know. But they took her, I feel like they were scared I was gonna, like, pass out from bleeding too much, maybe. And they didn't want me holding her if that happened. So they took her, and she was like in her little bassinet still. They were like, oh, you're just bleeding too bad. We need to control the bleeding before we deliver a placenta, before you can like move at all. So it was like a couple minutes had passed. So I'm not even really paying attention. I'm just like, oh, this is annoying. Like, I just want to sit up. So I didn't realize, but later when I was actually able to sit up, and they don't tell you this, but once I sat up after they pushed out the placenta, like I just felt like a lake came out, like so much blood everywhere, and there was like blood on the floor, and there was like blood coming out of the trash can. Like, it was just like there was like blood on the pillows that were on the bed, and it was just like a lot of going on. And so I'm like, did I tear? Like, what's going on? So they were like, yeah, you have a 2nd-degree laceration, and they were stitching it up, and, you know, it's fine now. And the doctor just congratulated me, and then he left. So I'm assuming, like, everything was done, and we were all just good to go. So they sat me up. I had the biggest headache of my life because the baby was just putting, like, weight on your back. That's why you're not supposed to sleep on your back. You don't get oxygen to your brain. And so I had a huge headache from that. And so I got to hold her, and we tried to figure out breastfeeding. It was just the best day, even though I look back on it and it was hard as hell, and I had like all of the side effects from an epidural that you could probably have, and the itchiness still lasted like hours after birth, by the way. Like, I was trying to breastfeed, like scratching myself to death. I am so thankful that I had Marco throughout that experience. He was really helpful. I'm thankful for my experience and for the induction to work as it did. I mean, most people that get induced, it takes like over 24 hours for it to really start dilating and everything. And I was able to start pushing after 16 hours, and it was so great to be able to say like, okay, I did that. Anybody that gives birth, no matter how you do it, a C-section, induction, an epidural, unmedicated, whatever you do, like, a warrior is inside of you to be able to do that, because it's hard emotionally and physically, and the recovery, like postpartum, is crazy, absolutely crazy. I went to my checkup today for 6 weeks and my laceration is still not healed, so I'm still on restrictions for that, and nobody tells you that. I'm happy that I got to share my story, and no birth is the same as another one, and this was mine. And
Hey there, baby Ray. You got the hiccups. Jesus.